Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk. It's time for us to do a little bit of a legislative preview, and really we're already into the legislative session, and fortunate to have with me Allison Maley, Government Public Relations Director at IPA, as well as our Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel, Brian Schwartz, just to talk about some things going on. And Allison, I'd be remiss here. We were just talking before we hit the recording about the homework area going on behind you right now. So sure appreciate all the efforts of what you're trying to get done with your kids. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for expounding on that. I appreciate it. As we try to ease us into this.
We've got some motivational words back here. So
nice. I like that. Change mindset, right?
Yes.
Change words, change mindset. Awesome.
That's right.
Very good.
We're much our first grader of that.
Good advice for all of us. Well, listen, this session already is starting off a little bit interesting. Definitely not back to normal, what we would expect, because we're still working through COVID, obviously, like everyone is. So what are we looking at just here in terms of how things are looking for this legislative session, Allison?
Yeah, I mean, schedule wise, it's a shortened schedule. The expectation, or the schedule anyway, indicates that they are hoping to adjourn April 8th, which is certainly a lot sooner than it has been in many of the past years outside of COVID. Usually, we're there till May 31st, but with petitions and an upcoming, general election or primary season coming up, rather, people want to get back to their districts, and if they're in new districts or, covering some new territory, to kind of get to know the folks out there before the primary season kicks in. So that's, I think, the primary reason behind, a truncated session. But the same number of days are scheduled. So it really kind of packing them in. The expectation is to adjourn before Easter, which normally there's about a week-long spring break around that time, so there won't be a week-long break that's anticipated anyway for right now. But obviously they've canceled in-person sessions the last several weeks of this month, and all committee work is happening virtually online. So there's not really a lot happening usually on the floor anyhow. So I'm not to say that there isn't anything to be done, but most of the work is occurring in committees at this time, even in a regular year. So that work is still being done in committees online. Lobbyists and others are allowed to Zoom in, get a link. You can still file witness slips. You can still testify. So those things are all still happening. We're still reaching out to legislators about bills that they filed and, any concerns or issues that we may have with them. So the same things are happening, just, in a different format.
Mm-hmm. Allison, one of the things I'm really kind of excited about is with a truncated session and getting done in April, if they can stick to that schedule, the legislature, we may know what's expected of us before the school year begins. Because on a normal year, with a lot of bills having immediate effective dates that don't get signed until late August, it's very difficult for administrators to adjust on the fly. So I'm hoping this year, number one, I'm hoping for fewer mandates, but at least knowing what those expectations are before we get the school year rolling.
Exactly.
Yeah. So obviously the number one issue that will be on people's minds will be the budget. Today's recording date is January 25th. It's a Tuesday. We'll push this out later this week on Friday, which will be the 28th, when people will view it. But we know that the budget address is, the following week, February 2nd, correct? And do we know if that's going to be virtual or in person yet, or how to?
The plan is that I've heard to come back that week,
okay,
for sure, to start coming back. I mean, barring any kind of other major surge between now and then, I think the plan is for everyone to come back in person that week and beyond.
So what are the early indications of what we're seeing here with regards to the budget?
Not really seeing a whole lot, but I think it would be fair to say that, most legislators and the governor don't really want to rock the boat going into an election year. So I would suspect maybe a flat budget. I would suspect that, the additional funding to EVF would be included in that. I hope, we all hope that. And I think certainly there are plenty of legislators that have been involved with EVF that would be fighting for that, and maybe then some to be added to the formula for that. So I would suspect everything else would be flat, though. So we'll see.
Well, and I would say that ISB's budget kind of signaled in that direction as well, in terms of making sure that we continue to add to EBF and then ensure that the other line items receive similar funding to what they have in the past as well. Obviously, in addition to EBF, which is always number one on our list to make sure that the funding formula gets what it needs, amongst other things like special education or whatever else we have out there that needs dollars. We're very interested in what's happening to support principal leadership. Right now, we have $1.8 million that's been put into the state for the support of the principal pipeline, which the ISB has issued an RFP, which that process is now closed, allowing for organizations the opportunity to support getting people through the pipeline, through their prep programs, and then helping them secure jobs. And those are state dollars that are supportive of that. We're hopeful we'll see that $1.8 million continue into future fiscal years. The second part of that is money for new principal mentoring. And we know that ESSER dollars are currently being used for this fiscal year, well, for the next 2 fiscal years, to support the mentoring of brand new principals. And then in a couple of years, we'll have to work to get that pivoted into hopefully a state line item, if at all possible. But we're grateful for that because, as we know, we've had an over 75% drop in the number of people seeking to be building leaders, meaning they've done everything they need to do to get that principal endorsement. So a lot has to be done with that as well. So that's a little bit about the budgets. We'll obviously know a lot more next week. I would say with where finances are, and obviously this being an election year, education will probably come out okay. Overall, there's no there is not an indication of that happening otherwise, I would say, at this juncture. But we did get some big news here this week, Allison, with a bill that we had been tracking quite a bit, 2778, House Bill 2778. If you wouldn't mind, and I'll bat this to both of you to just comment on, but just talk a little bit about what that is again for those that may not be familiar with it, and what's happening with that now moving forward.
Yeah, so the governor vetoed House Bill 2778, which again, I'm sure many of you have heard about in some form or fashion over the last few months or so. The initial bill would have provided unlimited paid administrative leave for any school employee or even higher ed, so community college folks that work in higher education institutions, universities, to be home in quarantine if they need to as a result of requirements from a state or local health department that they would need to quarantine because of exposure. It also provides that all sick leave benefits be returned to employees for the past school year. It provides wage protection for employees, especially at a school level, who, if a district would have to be remote for an emergency day of some sort, folks like bus drivers and cooks and those that would normally have been showing up to school would continue to receive their payment at that time as well, or their paychecks rather. So obviously we had a lot of concerns with the unlimitedness of the bill, and filling the spots of those people who would be out on leave for various reasons related to COVID, for their children as well. So anyone that had a school age child whose child needed to quarantine, that person could stay home with them as well. And not to minimize, the plight and the need for that kind of leave. But I think just while our folks are struggling with adequate staffing, it really kind of made it untenable. So
plus we saw districts trying to work those issues out locally, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which obviously we're supportive of.
Right. I think many had instituted MOUs with their local bargaining units to address those concerns. Because, I think there definitely are employees out there that have exhausted their sick leave from previous quarantines, or they had actually contracted COVID and were sick and, don't need to be at school if they're sick. So, folks were running out of days, I think, in some instances. Yeah. So as a result, the governor's office worked with the teachers unions primarily on a compromise that the governor would be comfortable with. And so that is to limit that administrative leave to anyone who is fully vaccinated. So the leave is limited to those folks, and the returning of your sick leave is also limited to people who've been fully vaccinated. Other than that, really the bill is pretty well intact, other than that provision. So
The wage protection is still
yes.
presumably in there
Yes.
as well, correct? Even though we haven't seen final language.
That's right. And so, yeah, we are waiting for the final language. I think we expect that pretty shortly, but I know LRB is pretty slammed with other legislative requests. So, we're going to hold off on, a position right away, but I think there are still some pieces that are still pretty concerning. And I think others are in the same position we are. School business officials, I think, put something out to their folks recently along those same lines. I would suspect that higher ed and community colleges, still have things that they didn't quite see out of the compromise that they would have liked to. So it will be a clean bill, a new bill going forward. And we'll see what is in the final language when that finally drops.
Well, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, presumably this would preempt any kind of local agreement that's in place.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's important to remember as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one other thing to note, and Allison, you and I talking about this a little bit yesterday as we were discussing kind of how things were looking moving forward, is that this is legislation that would only be in effect during an emergency order, correct? I mean, it's not something that once we're through the pandemic, I guess, if we hopefully can get there at some point in time, that we would not, and I know we've got to still see what the final legislation things are going to look like, but we're assuming that, once we're through the pandemic, that some of this would not necessarily be in effect, correct?
Well, if I recall, the sick leave being returned would be only for this current school year, unless that changes in the new bill. The paid administrative leave for COVID reasons would presumably only be for during the period in which a public health emergency is declared by the governor. Now, the wage protection for folks that are that would have come to school otherwise for a remote learning day or an emergency remote learning day, I presume carries on.
We'll see that moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just another thing for us to be paying attention to with this, and I'm sure much more to come as we see this move forward. So other things and obviously there's lots of bills that are currently being introduced, and we're working through a lot of that. I know you are, Allison, and talking with other management lobbyists and things as well about it. But a couple other key topic areas that come to mind here. One is just dealing with, the shortage, teacher shortage, sub shortage. We've got some legislation that's being proposed out there, maybe to extend the numbers of days that retirees could be working in a sub situation. Can you enlighten us about any of those things right now that are being discussed?
Yeah, we've engaged with conversations with IEA and IFT about extending those days for retirees to come back and teach. At this point, I think it's only going to be for TRS and not necessarily for other school employees. But that would, again, we're waiting on final legislation, final language, but it should be 140 days, but still maintaining that 100 of those days are in the same classroom, but then anything beyond that has to be in a different classroom. So that's the way the statute reads now with 120 days. So that same cap on the amount of days in the same classroom would still apply, even with 20 additional days of work, of service. There are other bills, however, that have been filed. Some bills go up to 150 days and lock it in for 2 years. The bill that we discussed with the unions would sunset on June 30th of 2022. So really just till the end of the school year. But I think we all know that this is a problem that, will not fix itself in the next 6 months or so. So I think there are certainly other pieces of legislation out there that would help us sort of begin to address the problem long term. Yeah.
Well, we're hopeful because we know that with our own members subbing as much as they are, and we know that there already have people rationing days with their retirees in order to try to carry them forward as long as possible. And one other thing that I found interesting when we did our last IPA plugged in, we had a school leader, I think it was Jackie Schiffler up in Riverton, was talking about how one of the retirees was even choosing to sub as a paraprofessional in situations. Obviously, we're not making as much money and doing it just probably out of the kindness of that person's heart. just to help fill in the gaps. But there are ways of leveraging, people's time if they're willing to give it as much as we can. But no doubt we need some support here when it comes to looking at the sub shortage, the educator shortage. I know we've got bills being introduced related to, removing like the EdTPA requirement from the teacher endorsement licensure process. I know there was a bill Representative Scheer had forward that didn't make it out of committee, but hopefully we'll be able to see something like that moving forward, because we know we've got a lot of work there that needs to be done as well. Beyond that, working on bringing up my list here again, another thing that I know got a lot of traction in our legislative committee dealt with PD hours and looking at a potential reduction in those requirements. Moratorium maybe might be a way to describe it for this school year, both PD hours as well as the Administrator Academy credit requirements. So what are we looking at with that?
Yeah, there's a couple pieces of legislation that have been filed along those lines. So if I'm remembering correctly, one of them reduces the amount of PD required by 20% for this school year. Another one just takes it down by 20 hours, I believe. So there's a more of a just hard and fast hour reduction. And then also putting that moratorium on admin academies for just this school year. So, I think those will have to kind of get meshed together if they even make it forward in any way. But I think, that is something that I think legislators have been hearing from their constituents and all of you and other members across the field that given everything that's going on and given that COVID is not ended, that everyone's time is at a premium and a little relief for some PD requirements would be helpful.
Yeah. The timing on that's going to be critical as well.
Yeah, because I think it's within like your cycle. If you're within your cycle this school year, that's when it applies. So it's kind of wonky in terms of who would actually benefit from it, I think.
Sure. And it might not even, if the legislature even stays on schedule, it might not get signed into law until after July 1st. So I don't want our administrators, especially out there, to count on that and not take an academy in the event that it doesn't get passed or it gets vetoed, because then there will be a penalty.
Yeah.
We have some more information on where that bill is going to land.
Yeah. So, and I would say, as we're having conversations with legislators, if they're wanting to make sure that they're providing that relief for administrators, maybe to look not beyond just this year, either next year or allowing some accommodation within someone's certification cycle as well. So those are some things for us to consider. So what I want to do here real quick is, Allison, give you an opportunity to pitch the Policy and Action Center. And I'm going to share the websites real fast and just remind people, in order to get to this, if you're on the home screen, come over to the Advocate tab. If you want some light reading, read up on our principal pipeline crisis, download the policy brief there, read through kind of the current status of things and recommendations that we have to help with that. There's a lot of other resources that are here available to you, but I wanted to pinpoint the IPA Action Center. You can click on that. And as I'm bringing that up, Allison, any just thoughts with regards to what school leaders can find here and how they can leverage this when it comes to their advocacy?
Yeah, so obviously we still have the alert on 2778, so I probably need to take that down here pretty soon or modify it in some way. But really, probably those main three blocks at the top are advocate sign up. So through this platform, we have the ability to just send messages and text messages to those that sign up to let you know that there is an active action alert. So you can easily take action on your phone. We don't spam you and we don't send a bunch of messages, but occasionally it's helpful to kind of get that message out there very quickly. So if you're interested in receiving those updates, you would sign up at the advocate sign up. In the middle there, we get legislator lookup. So you can obviously pull in your home address or your school address. It's helpful to know both. If you know that your home isn't necessarily in the same legislative district as where you might be working. I know that kind of the farther down south we get, the larger the districts are. So that may not be as much of an issue, but I know certainly as the closer we get to more populated areas, there's quite a bit of an overlap in terms of where legislative boundaries lie. So it's got your, obviously it's got the president, vice president, your congressional members, and your members of the state legislature as well. And then finally, I think the one that is probably the most relevant at the moment is legislator introduction. So there's a few steps along the way, entering in your personal information. And again, you can select whether or not you want to put in your home address or your school address. I would do both, honestly, if you think that you're, in different districts, either way, to just introduce yourself to your legislators and say, I am a school leader in your district, I work in your district, and I'm available to provide, any insight into education policy as you're considering new bills this year. So, it will give them your phone number and your email address. So hopefully they will reach back out to you when they have questions and start developing that relationship or enhancing that relationship that you may already have. So it's just a really quick way to just introduce yourself and kind of get your name out there to the legislators in your area. And hopefully they will, contact you when things come up across their desk.
It's very thorough. Very thorough and all the information it's looking for.
I know. Well, I wanted to make sure, especially like cell phone number is on there so that, we've had in the past lots of legislators that, have the cell phone number of principals in their district and they text them from the floor. So if you're interested in that, maybe you're not, but if you are, and that's an easy way and a preferred way to be contacted, then that's a really great way for you to stay in touch with your legislators and vice versa.
Yeah. And it's particularly critical this year as they're seeing less of us physically,
right,
because of the COVID restrictions, that principals reach out to their legislators and get to know them a little bit, make their voice and their positions known.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for just a quick tutorial there. It's very user friendly, very easy to use. So Brian, one last thing here as we're wrapping up, not necessarily completely related to what we've got going on in the General Assembly, but I know something that our members really find benefit of and are probably looking forward to coming in the next month or two is our salary study. So you mind just giving us a quick update on that?
Sure. Well, we will have our salary study, which is one of a kind. It's a salary and benefits study that many of you participated in, and we compile the information to really give our members an idea of what types of salary and benefits they should be looking for in a particular position with a particular number of years of experience. And one of the things that was very popular last year that we're going to do again this year is a calculator where you can plug in your relevant information and get a salary range and benefit range for your area of the state with your experience and so forth. So kind of a neat tool.
Absolutely, which is terrific if you are kind of curious about where you stand on an average compared to your colleagues, or if you're looking for a position in a certain part of the state, you can plug in that demographic information as well and get a predicted, calculated salary just to give an ballpark idea of maybe what you should be expecting based on what's happening out in the field. So yeah, quite a resource there for sure. So thanks for an update on that, Brian. And thanks to you both, Brian and Allison, for spending a few minutes here with me, give us a preview of what's happening here with legislative session and what we can expect. I can't emphasize enough for everybody to be engaged through that process as much as possible. Please, get questions, contact us here, and also be sure to reach out to your members of the General Assembly. And pay attention here too through the process of this election cycle, because with the census and the remap, there's a good chance that, or possibility anyway, that you could have a new member of the General Assembly representing you starting with this next legislative session. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the IPA, joined by Allison Maley, Government Public Relations Director, Brian Schwartz, General Counsel and Deputy Executive Director here at IPA. As always, if there's anything we can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call or check us out on the web at www.ilprinciples.org. Take care.